So Jeff Krupp, I am the only person that you're meeting today that has applications, doesn't have data, doesn't have analytics, doesn't have machine learning in your title. So with that, please pattern your questions if you have for me at the end. I am not a data scientist. I am one who uses all of the great foundational stuff that data scientists, data people leverage in order to create great, awesome experiences for customers as we go forward. A little bit of my background, I just started with Caterpillar in October of 2019, so haven't been here a long time, but I did work at Ford Motor Company for about 20 years in various roles. I actually worked with the Cars.com team quite a bit as well, so a lot of the things they talked about were near and dear to my heart: lead conversion, how you drive that with the dealer experience, everything else against there. So I have a lot of experience there. And then I also worked at a real estate company called Realogy, which is, no one's heard of Realogy, but Realogy owns Coldwell Banker, Century 21, ERA. It's one of those big conglomerates behind the scenes that no one's ever heard of. And within there, we were driving a lot of things like determining where to set up real estate offices using predictive analytics on maps and which brand works in which areas, other things along those lines. As well as I had a board assignment for a AI virtual assistant called Ojo, which I think in the near future you're probably going to start hearing about Ojo more and more across the real estate space. It's a way in which people are leveraging that in order to help with their home research process going forward. Really interesting product. So if you ever want to look at something, it's not Caterpillar, but look at something called Ojo, really cool. So Caterpillar. I believe most people know who Caterpillar. It's a pretty iconic company, in the industrial space. But go through this a little bit just to talk about our scale. We're obviously a global organization with many different verticals. People know when they're driving down the highway, they see the big yellow construction trucks on the side of the road. That's us. Everyone kind of knows us in that way. But also from a resource industries. Resource industries is think of like mining. So, in the Chilean desert, they have mines out there that are running fully autonomous mining trucks the wheels are 14 feet tall, 3 stories large. These machines running fully autonomously around, square mile facility, driving all that. So that's kind of resource industries. But then energy and transportation as well. So locomotive engines is kind of on the transportation side. From an energy perspective, this is generators, right? So one of the things that I thought was really interesting is many of the largest cloud hosting centers are powered by Caterpillar at the back end. So from a standpoint, their generators for UPS systems, other things like that, are driven through there. So a lot of cool things there that we have across the space. So now from a technology perspective, I want to talk about this a little bit. I'm going to use, if you bear with me, I'm going to use a corny analogy, leveraging oil. So oil, obviously, when you think about machines and industries, oil is critical to the operations. There's derivatives of oil. It's gas that's running your machines. It's oil that's lubricating your engine, other things along those lines. But for us, from a digital standpoint, data is oil, right? Data is critical for us. Data is driving all of these different experiences that we're creating at an application layer, everything from the beginning to the end. And really from an analytics perspective, that's what makes the oil move, right? So we think about analytics, we think about all these models that we're creating, how we use that in order to create better experiences, and I'll go through some of those use cases as we move forward. From a stack perspective, this is just, again, very, very high level. One of the key elements of what we have is connectivity, right? So we have or approximately 1 million connected assets globally that are providing tons of information. We'll have a slide on connectivity as we go forward. So that's kind of the foundation, getting the data, getting access to the data from a global standpoint and how we leverage that. Then from a platform perspective, and Andrea did a great job talking about data at Mars, same thing happens with Caterpillar. We have many different disparate data sources. How do we bring all this in? How do we ensure that our data quality remains up? And then leveraging that to drive these different models, these different experiences. With the vast amount of data we have and we capture from all these connected assets, how we leverage that. And then the part that's near and dear to my heart is applications, right? What applications are we creating? This includes things like e-commerce, supply chain, also fleet management, all these different aspects of what we're doing from an application layer. What are those experiences that we're creating that are leveraging all of the great data and platform services that we have? Analytics Analytics is, as I mentioned, kind of that's the engine that's driving a lot of the decisions that we're making, the experiences that we're showing to end customers as we go forward. Why connectivity? So from a connectivity perspective, it is, it's uniting three different distinct units we have within Caterpillar. Caterpillar obviously works through we have 168 global dealers, and we have to ensure that from a connectivity perspective, all this data is flowing from our customers, which, some of our customers are multi-million dollar companies. Some of our dealers are multi-billion dollar companies alone. So we're working with these people, we're working with them, and we need to ensure that that data is flowing effectively all the way through those channels. And then ultimately, from a customer perspective, we're leveraging that in order to drive things like utilization and uptime, we're decreasing our operating costs, ensuring efficiencies as we go forward. One thing that I'll just highlight here, because cat speak, enables customer value agreements. Think of that as like extended service plans in a general sense that you're familiar with in the auto space. These are ways in which we're driving kind of that experience all the way throughout. Okay, and I'm going to go into a few of the specifics. So applications. So when you think about all of the different applications and business verticals that we have across the space, there's many different applications that we have to create. From a CAT app perspective, this is on your phone, somebody out who's within a construction site, managing all of their fleet of machines and assets that they have locally. It's providing alerts. It's providing, hey, we think this is going to go wrong with your machine. Providing alerts to there. You see like the graphics didn't necessarily show as great, but like little red symbols indicating you have an alert here, something that's going on. You need to take action on it. But then also things like inspecting the machines. Some of these are multi-million dollar machines that they have running within these job sites, and it's a resource, right? You're managing, as a fleet manager, you're managing the people when they're showing up, what their job shifts are, but you're also managing these things as resources of how am I using this mining truck, how am I using this bulldozer to make sure that I'm planning this effectively and really kind of that orchestration of everything that you have against there, how that all comes together. MineStar. So MineStar is another really interesting application we have. I talked about automated mining trucks earlier. So our mining trucks I heard the stat just recently within Caterpillar, our mining trucks every day drive the equivalent around the world twice. Automated, fully automated, zero safety issues, other things along those lines. So you can imagine kind of the complexity of what that means, like understanding how these machines are running within a working job site. They have visual recognition using LiDAR in order to expose different threats that they feel from a safety perspective. All these things are operating on a regular basis all across the globe. Then e-commerce, right? So at the end of the day, we're still a company that's looking for profit. We're trying to make our customers' experiences better as we drive forward, but we're also trying to drive profitability for both ourselves and our dealers. So how can we leverage these things in kind of an e-commerce capacity as well? I'll go into some of those use cases on the following slides. Okay, so predictive analytics. I talked about e-commerce a little bit. So e-commerce, and these are things that are pervasive, right? And the thing that I'd say is that's great for all of you, kind of in the data industry. It's fairly easy if you're working in data, you're working, leveraging machine learning, all these different things, to translate into different industries. I went from automotive to real estate now to Caterpillar from an industrial perspective, and those, leveraging e-commerce is true across all those verticals, right? Be it either lead generation, selling products, other things along those lines. It's driving, and from our standpoint, this is falling off. It's driving kind of those e-commerce experience using clickstream analysis from a website perspective, your campaign effectiveness as you go forward, tracking all of these things more effectively and providing recommendation engines on how do we create a better experience, and how do we ultimately drive from a bottom line perspective of what we're doing as we move forward. Repair and maintenance recommendations, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on the next slide. And I know it's before break, so I'm not going to have a lot more time. But from a repair and maintenance recommendation perspective, this is the stuff that's really extremely interesting. So those various data elements that we get, we're getting things like the oil viscosity and the bucket fill rate and all these different air pressure on air filters, like all these different data elements are coming in and being sent to us through our connectivity channels. And we're leveraging those in order to provide recommendations saying, we think your fuel injector is going to fail. We think this is going to happen with some level of certainty and frequency against there. So all of this data, this vast terabytes of data that we have that we capture and leverage across a space, is then providing the customer at the local job site, here's what we recommend you need to do. The key, one of the biggest challenges our customers have, or one of the biggest pain points our customers have, is unplanned downtime, right? So it's not about if you can plan a maintenance event or something else, or repair something off hours, fine. If you have at the start of your day, that machine, that critical machine for what you're going to do goes down, and you didn't know that it was happening, there's obviously a huge level of frustration and also financial impact. So from our standpoint, we're leveraging the data in order to drive those recommendations from a repair and maintenance perspective with some level of certainty through to our customers so that they can take action on that part when the shift is off or something else along those lines, and really drive kind of the experience. Operations efficiency. So talked about the amount of data and other things that we capture. These things are driving from a standpoint of cost elements from an operation perspective, fuel efficiency. Certain parts that maybe it's not going to fail, but that it's running suboptimally, and we can provide recommendations on, if you do this, it's going to improve X from a percentage of effectiveness. The fuel consumption, other things like that are going to go down. So we're tracking all of those things and creating very sophisticated models in order to help our out in the field do that more effectively. And then inventory management, and Andrea talking about supply chain and other things along those lines. From our standpoint, we provide repair and maintenance recommendations. Here's what we need you to do, or here's what we think you need to do. That's all going to fall on deaf ears if the part's not available, right? If that part's not at the local dealership or within kind of the region, in order to say, I have that part, here's what you need to do, and we have the part, and we can schedule that, and we can get that organized. If we don't have that, then everything kind of falls apart from a standpoint of making sure that all these things holistically, from kind of our experience, is flowing and working effectively across the space. Okay, now I'm going to give just one more, again, before break, one detailed example of what I'm really talking about. So when we go into this is more in the kind of the repair and maintenance perspective. So take that mining customer that I described, maybe in the Chilean desert. We have information that's flowing in, from a connectivity perspective, capturing all of these things. And this is Andrea also talked about this too. I thought it was funny. She said, there's only so much we can share as far as details because we're big corporate organizations and it has to go through legal and all this other stuff. This is one we can't share. It was shared at Industry Day. We have a lot of other stories like this, but the one here, so we gave a 10-day advance notice of a brake failure that was going to occur. So what this happens is, so from a potential proactive result perspective, this is creating, the amount of downtime that was required in order to fix this, and the repair cost of what this is, it's driving a potential savings of almost $800,000 within that, on this one device that we felt this, from a mining truck, this was going to cost. Because again, it's more about, if that machine's not running, your people aren't working. And those people are getting paid regardless if the machine's working or not. So you need to make sure that these things are flowing, all this is working effectively. So from a standpoint of what actually happens here, so from an actual reactive result, if we were to go down the other side here, the repair cost is about $100,000. And I know that seems really crazy when you're talking about $100,000, and that's the cheap portion of this. But when you think about the complexity of what we're talking about from a repair perspective, what that is, and then from a unnecessary cost perspective of $700,000, that was potential that could have been resolved. So when you look at this, it just talks about the value that predictive analytics can have in the field, right? If this happened, you're talking about close to $1 million of additional costs that's going into the pipeline. You have a frustrated customer. You have a dealer who's also frustrated that because they're dealing with a frustrated customer. And then from our standpoint, this is all just talking about what that actual repair is. Then next time they might buy one of our competitor products, right? If we have these types of solutions in place, that's going to hopefully cause that loyalty and really from a standpoint of our place within the market, from a standpoint of being kind of one of the premier products within the industrial space. This is why they use us, and we need to leverage that oil, that data, that predictive analytics, in order to drive those experiences more effectively. So we're coming up on break, but I think we have a couple minutes for questions. I did want to leave a couple minutes for questions for anyone out there. So, yes.
So you mentioned about, thanks for the big presentation, it was really good.
Yeah.
But you mentioned about the repair and maintenance part of your business.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of challenges that occur around that kind of data is you do not know always what is a necessary condition of failure using the data that you already have, because you don't have real simulated instances enough to probably train your training. So how do you deal with those kind of situations in the scenario where you do not have that?
Yeah. So the question is how, like, from a confidence perspective, how do you build up confidence in your models, because maybe these things haven't occurred or something else along those lines. Mm-hmm. So just repeating so everyone can hear. So from that, you're right. That is a challenge to what we do, and from that standpoint, obviously we're collecting over 1 million assets worth of data, right? So it's not a small pocket. There are certain instances where you're dealing with maybe special regional considerations. From a standpoint of a truck operating in Alaska versus one in a Chilean desert are going to have different layers to that. So you have to have that understanding of the complexities of where you're dealing with all these different things. But you also have to provide some type of level of confidence in what you're saying, right? So there's not, in almost any model that you create, it's very hard to say, this will happen. I'm 100% confident this will happen. But if you can say, I'm 90%, I'm 80%, whatever it is, if you provide that information in the value of what it is, so from a standpoint of, you might have $1,000 repair on something that could have the negative impact of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'd rather provide that recommendation with our level of confidence in it, saying we're 80% confident, we're being fully transparent on where it is, based on the data that we have, and then they can make that decision. It's somewhat of an insurance policy when you're talking about repair and maintenance, right? It's you're providing this information, you're giving kind of why you came up with that decision, the rationale for it, and then those people ultimately, be it the customer or be it the dealer, are going to make their decision on what they want to do with it. So there is some element of, there is some things that you're not as confident on. Some we're going to have pretty strong confidence, and some will be, and when it's not as confident, we'll say that as well. So, yep. Yes?
I have a question. So how Caterpillar collects the data from the products?
How do we capture the data from the products?
Master through some particular type of device, or is the Wi-Fi enabled or Bluetooth enabled product and sending the data daily or
Yep.
weekly?
So the question is, how do we capture the data from these globally connected assets across the board? So one, we do have basically cellular capabilities within many of our devices. So they basically, there's a service that pings the, and we will create different levels of, it could be a daily capture of information. It could be almost real time, like, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, depending on the level of sophistication, the level of also kind of the product, right? So, a small machine, it's probably not necessary to capture that from a daily frequency. One of those $1 million mining trucks, yes, that's what we call a high IQ asset. Those are things that we're going to capture that on a regular cadence, because if there's any failure there, it's going to have a major operation. Another thing that's really interesting about our space is our customers have different profiles, right? So from a customer perspective, we have some customers who have one piece of equipment, and that's their lifeblood. We have others that have hundreds of things within their fleet that they can distribute. So if one goes down, they're just like, yeah, replace it with this other one that I have kind of sitting in the background because I have 10 of them. I have one that's always kind of on rotation. But that person that has one, that's their lifeblood, right? And that means that person potentially isn't working for the day or for the week or whatever it is. So how do you ensure that when we're capturing all this information, it's also based on what the customer wants and how they're driving it. You talked about Wi-Fi as well. We do have ways in which it can be captured in a batch mode. So potentially think you have a mine and you don't have cellular capabilities in order to capture things that are deep underground. So when it comes back up for air, we capture it through Wi-Fi and it can come back to us. Yes?
Are these capabilities something that everyone gets who buys the equipment, or is it a subscription model that people really buy?
It depends on the product. It depends on the product. Some are subscription models. So some are based on that level of, do you want to give us your data daily and we'll give you recommendations, or is it something that you want more real time, depending on what it is. I talked about those different customers. So it depends. But yes, there's both aspects to it.